Good morning, everyone. I want to encourage you to open up your Bibles. Turn with me over to Psalm 4 Bible app, or if you have a Bible, go ahead and turn over there with me if you're where you're able to. If you're not able to, we're glad that you're on here as well. If you're just listening in, Psalm 4, we're going to be there in just a few minutes. I apologize for being a little later than usual this morning. I was having problems with EVMux, the program that I use, and I couldn't get it to connect to my Facebook, and so I wasn't going to go live. And I also was having problems with it switching out the verses as I have it on the screen, switching out to different the Psalm 4. So I had to work through all that before I could get on here this morning, and so I apologize. It took me longer than I thought it was going to take. Psalm 4 is a really encouraging psalm, and it's a lot of it is about it's an evening prayer, and it's about trying to find some sleep in the middle of distress. And some people believe that this follows Psalm 3 because it was probably written during the same difficult period as Psalm 3. And perhaps just like Psalm 5, it's written during the time of Absalom's rebellion, which really seems to fit. It's definitely possible, but I can say this: we really don't know when it was written. We have no idea what the circumstances are. We just know that David was in a time of distress. And so I think the fact that David doesn't specify for this psalm really kind of helps us, kind of makes it general for us in trying to help us be able to find peace and rest in the middle of some kind of distress in our lives. I want you to notice what it says over in verse 8. In verse 8, he finishes off, he says, "But I will both lie down in peace and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety." And sometimes, you could be lying down in bed and your mind would just be full of all kinds of things. And you're angry and fearful. You're not able to sleep. And yet the message of Psalm 4 helps David be able to shut his eyes and find sleep. How many of you have ever had some kind of trouble sleeping at night? And I'm not talking about restless leg syndrome. I'm talking about a night of anxiety, whatever it is, just weighing heavy on you. We talked about this in the last psalm, and so I think this kind of connects to the psalm before this, Psalm 3, in the sense that David finds rest when many of us wouldn't be able to. Maybe your enemies are attacking in some way. You're struggling with your finances. You have marriage issues, family issues that are brewing. The church has some kind of trouble. Someone's wronged you in some way, or you've done something wrong in some way, and you're just tossing and you're turning. And if that's you, then I want to encourage you to study Psalm 4. I think that would be a great help to you. And so let's look at the different points that we find in this psalm that will help us learn what to do when we are distressed and we are struggling to sleep. Look at the first verse. He says, "Hear me when I call, O God of my righteousness, and you have relieved me in my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer." And so you notice who David's calling on. He's calling on God, but he calls him the God of his righteousness. Some versions say the God of justice, the God of who vindicates me, the God who declares me to be innocent. And I don't think this is a formality here. This has a purpose within the psalm. David often does that. I think we need to work on that, addressing God in a way that addresses the things that we're talking about in our psalm. And so he's calling on God because God is he's a righteous judge. He's the God that upholds justice, especially for people who are being mistreated. He's the God who straightens everything out when life gets all tangled up and there are there's difficulties. And so also notice on what basis David turns to God in the middle of the difficult and stressful time. He says, "You have relieved me in my distress." Now, David's not saying that God's already relieved him of this burden. He's looking backwards and he's remembering all the times that God's relieved him and given him deliverances from other distresses. And I think it's kind of helpful to look back and see how God had helped David in the past. I think it's helpful for us when we think back in our lives, the struggles that come our way and the ways that God has gotten us through, as long as we've had faith in God. And that helps us be able to deal with things in our life now. And so David appeals for future mercies based upon past mercies. And just think about some things in David's life, some times where God delivered him from distresses. You think about the lion and bears that God delivered him from. You think about Goliath on the battlefield or Saul's attacks. David had been delivered with the Philistines and many other things, Philistines on the battlefield. I think many people kind of, when you ask for help to be able to sleep, they'll say, well, I want you to picture sheep and count them. I think the hope is that you'll get this visualization in your mind, and it'll help kind of distract you from whatever stressful situations that you have going in your life, and that'll, in the moment, kind of give you some peace. But what if we stop to count our blessings instead? Count all the times that God has helped me in the past, all the times that God's brought me through things and delivered me from things or provided for me during things. Count your blessings. Like, you have air to breathe, and that's from God. You have clothes to wear, you have food to eat, and many of us have friends and brothers and sisters who really help us through things. They're supporting us. That's really helpful for us to do. Stop and count our blessings instead of counting sheep. Then in verses 2 and 3, he says, how long, O you sons of men, will you turn my glory to shame? How long will you love worthlessness and seek falsehood? But note that the Lord is set apart for him who is godly, and the Lord will hear when I call him. And so David starts by asking his opponents some questions. He says, how long are you going to attack me? How long are you going to try to bring glory to shame? How long are you going to be thinking about or loving these worthless and falsehoods? Wicked people love wicked things. And so it's foolish to put your trust in unstable, worthless things. And so, why do you do this, wicked people? That was David's question. And then David recognizes God has set him apart for himself. He set apart the godly from the wicked in this life. He sets apart the godly for himself. He sets apart the godly from their enemies. And he sets apart the glory in that. He listens in their prayers and he answers them. This is why it's so foolish for the wicked to put David down, because God had chosen David. It was foolish for Absalom to turn against his father because David was God's chosen. It was foolish for Saul to chase David around because David was God's chosen. And so David had a choice in all of this. David could either focus on his enemies, which is easy for us to do sometimes, or he could focus on God. He could either focus on these people who are shaming him by seeking after these lies and these vain words about him, or he could focus on God who has set him apart. He could focus on his enemies, and he would have a reason to stay awake. Or he could focus on God and find peace. He could imagine the protection and the blessings that God's given him. He could rest in the thought that God separated him from those enemies. He could find the peace of God which surpasses all understandings, by letting his request be made known to God, casting his cares upon him, for he cares for them. And because God hears him when he calls and answers. And so we have the same choice. We can focus on our culture and everything that our culture will throw our way to say that we're backwards, we're the uneducated, we're just clinging to our Bibles, and that they can't really stand the separation. Or we could focus on God who blesses us as his chosen. All the spiritual blessings in the heavenly places. And we can remember that he hears us when we call to him and talk to him. Look at verses 4 and 5. We're going to go ahead and through the whole psalm here. In verses 4 and 5, he says, be angry and do not sin. Meditate within your heart on your bed and be still. He says, offer the sacrifices of righteousness and put your trust in the Lord. And so David here gives some very vital instructions. He says, be angry, but don't sin. Anger, like Ephesians 4, actually quotes this passage. In Ephesians 4, we find out that anger is like letting Satan put his foot in the door. When we let anger sit there and simmer, we let Satan take advantage of what he's doing in our hearts. Anger's from Satan, right? And we're letting him have his foot in the door and getting wedging himself into our relationships, into our life. And anger often causes us to do things that we know we shouldn't do. And so he says, don't do anything you're going to regret. You know, I think when we slow down and we really think and we pray and we focus on God, that kind of concentration and consideration will not allow us to do what we would do otherwise in the moment of frustration. Consider God and then deal with it. And I think that's really important because what we can do is often lay in our beds and we can rehearse, we can map out our vengeance against people. And that's not what we should do as Christians. We shouldn't do that. Instead of figuring out how we're going to get even, we need to learn to trust in the Lord. And that starts with offering the right kinds of sacrifices. And perhaps he's talking about like Old Testament sacrifices, but what makes more sense in the context is like the sacrifices of Psalm 51:17, where he says, a broken, contrite heart, these, O Lord, you do not, you love. You know, rather than lying on our beds and plotting out our vengeance, we need to see our own part. We need to turn to God because of our own brokenness. We need to trust that he's going to fix the mess that we've gotten ourselves into. Trust the Lord and he'll take care of this. And that leads us to this last section here in verses 6 and 7, where he says, there are many who say, who will show us any good? Lord, lift up the light of your countenance upon us. You have put gladness in your heart, more than in the season that their grain and wine increase. There are some people who stay awake at night because they believe they have a right to a sense of blessing. Like they want God to show them all good. They want God's face to shine upon them. There are many people who are serving God for the blessings. It's like they're shopping around for the greatest blessings. It's like the health and wealth gospel. He will bless their business. He will help in many of their relationships. But obeying the gospel doesn't guarantee any of that. And so those reasons are more about them than it is about the Lord. When we think this way, our sights are set too low. Like many will lie awake because they don't have all the grain and the wine blessings that they think they should have. They don't drive the nicest cars or have the fanciest houses, or they don't eat at all the fancy restaurants that everybody else does. But David grasped something that a lot of us we don't think about. Earthly blessings, they are useless. It's the joy in our relationship with God and all that is in him where we find our peace. And so we may not have the physical blessings, but we can have God and everything that's found in him, and that should be enough for us. I think too often we lie awake and we're worried about obtaining, some kind of earthly blessings. And honestly, the more you have to worry about. All the while, those things that really matter in the grand scheme of things, we don't think about. Sleep comes to those who find their joy in the Lord. It comes to those who find their peace because they have heavenly blessings that are being protected by the Lord. Don't understand, like struggles and difficulties and distresses, they will come. This psalm is not teaching that we're not going to have to face those things. In fact, it demonstrates the exact opposite. There will be enemies, there will be trials, there will be struggles in life. But that doesn't mean that, but what it means is that despite the distresses, we can lie down and sleep at night. We don't have to toss and turn in our beds because of them. Rather, we can find sleep because of our relationship with God, because he will bring us safely through the distress, just like he's done a number of times. And if we could just stop and count the blessings and remember all the times that God's helped us in our life, we certainly will find great peace. I hope that's helpful. I love the Psalms. I love Psalms like this one. We talk about stress, we talk about depression, talk about anxiety, and all those things are real. They're human experiences. And if we don't believe they're real, then study the Psalms, because David experienced all of those things in his life. But what's amazing is that a man after God's own heart is really helped defined in the Psalms. We see it. We see David's meditations about God, his thoughts about God, the way he would lay down at night and think about God. And what a blessing. I think we need to be challenged on this more, but appreciate your time this morning. So glad that you're here. I want to encourage you not to just leave this lesson here, not to just leave this psalm here, but open up the psalm, read it for yourself and think about it. Really give some time in it and meditate on it throughout your day. I hope everybody, oh, by the way, if you are going to be, if you're going to be in the area today, later today at 4 p.m., there's going to be a Bible study at Noble Coffee in the downtown area. We've had several come, several from Stony Creek and several from the community come. And so we'd love to be able to have you there if you're able to, if you're in the area and you're available around that time, we'd love to be able to have you come join us. But I hope everybody has a great rest of their day. God bless everybody.